Hi, I'm Angela Richardson Mook. I am a 6-time surrogate and 2-time egg donor, and I am also CEO and founder of Alcea Surrogacy.
My name is Laura Hudson. I am a 3-time surrogate and a case manager for Alcea Surrogacy.
And today we are here to discuss potential surrogates' most burning questions. I think the biggest myth or question that we get, and tell me if you hear this from your surrogates on the daily basis, is people think that there is this desire to want to keep the baby. Yeah. And I know from my lens, it's never yours in the first place. Right. And it's so disconnected from the reality of planning, right? You're not thinking about names. You're not thinking about childcare, all the purchasing, all the things to do that you're preparing. A baby upends everything of your whole life. And when you're not preparing for those things, the focus is really on how you can best take care of yourself during the pregnancy to hand over the most healthy version of this process to your intended parents. But I never felt any feelings of wanting to keep the baby. I sometimes missed and longed the experience simply because what we talked about, you're kind of a watched pot. But those were more around the journey and the reflection and the bond that I had with the intended parents, not so much with the baby.
Yeah. And I think the satisfaction of completing the journey is another emotional reward that you get to just keep. It's the memories, it's the moments that you get to hang on to.
Yeah.
When I gave birth to my own children, obviously the experience was so different because you are going home to care for somebody else and your body is recovering and healing. And it's a little bit of this tug to take care of someone else now.
Yeah.
Emotionally, you feel the love, that you've carried for so long in your belly. And now it's here in human form. And with surrogacy, I feel it was very different in that you go home and the focus is taking care of yourself. And that's it. Which is actually, I feel like a little bit easier. You go home, you sleep. You don't have, a baby to take care of. You can go to the gym. You can eat healthy. You can focus on your family dynamic and pour back into that.
So, Laura, the question I get from all intended parents, can a surrogate refuse to give the baby up after birth? Short answer, no. No, you're legally protected by a pre-birth order. There's really no wiggle room there. Yeah. With gestational surrogacy, you do not use your own eggs. So we're going to use either the egg and sperm of the people that you're caring for, donor, sometimes both, but regardless, it's never biologically related to you. Yeah. So that law protects that, and there is no ability to keep that baby, even if you wanted to.
Nope. Okay, so what if I change my mind?
Well, I think in order to answer that question in totality, you really kind of have to think about the when you change your mind. So I always want to say that one thing we all will never be able to give away is our bodily autonomy in this process. And so, as you're getting through the screening process, the early medical screening, the legal process, before they physically place that embryo into your uterus in hopes that it's going to implant, you always have full ability to say, you know what, I've changed my mind and this isn't for me. Mm-hmm. And that's why I think the education and research process in this process is so important. You need to find not only good intended parent partner, but a good agency partner that's heavily focused on moving forward with ethics, in transparency, that they're doing all of the right things to protect not only the surrogate, but the embryo, and that you're really in the forefront of the mind of the agency from a ethics perspective. So up until the time you're physically pregnant, you can always opt out. And, it doesn't happen often and it has to come with a lot of intention, but we've had people get all the way through the legal process and ultimately decide this isn't for them. Yeah. And I urge everyone to explore those feelings, to sit in them, to feel those feelings, because ultimately if you're having any kind of red flag or doubt, it might not be the process for you. This is not a journey to take lightly. But when it comes to what intended parents usually ask me, and that's can they change their mind during pregnancy or after pregnancy, that's actually the beauty of gestational surrogacy here in the United States. So most every state, and certainly the states that Alcea does business in, we can always establish parentage before the birth. And so a pre-birth order means that even if a surrogate tried to quote unquote change her mind after the birth, it's actually impossible, legally speaking, for her to have any kind of recourse. Parental rights are established before the birth. They name whoever the legal and responsible party is. And from the second that that baby is born, we know that they have all full rights and responsibilities to that, and the surrogate has none.
Yeah.
And so that's something that's done not only through the legal contract, but also through that pre-birth order process.
Right. All right. So, Angela,
Yes.
how much can you make doing surrogacy?
So first-time surrogates typically have a base compensation of between $45,000 and $65,000, and then they're compensated with an extras package of between $10,000 and $15,000. So first-time surrogates' compensation is typically between $60,000 and $85,000 total, all in. Repeat surrogates can make substantially more than that. Typically, repeat surrogates have a base compensation of $75,000 plus. We have some with comps all the way up into the $100,000 range. And ultimately, I always tell intended parents that a surrogate will cost exactly what she sees this process meaning for her family. So ultimately, that's the only person that can set that base compensation. But from a standard perspective, we're going to see base comps between $45,000 and $65,000 for a first-time surrogate. So Laura, how do surrogates typically feel after giving birth?
I think that it can range widely. Every surrogate feels so differently after birth. Some take it in stride. They're ready to hit the ground running and get back to normal life. And some have a little bit more of an emotional attachment, a little bit to work through after giving birth. And then, processing that journey is complete. It feels a little bit of, that emptiness after you've it's almost like coming back from vacation.
You're a watched pot. Everyone's waiting for you to give birth. Everyone's thinking about it. Everyone's been preparing for it. And then the event finally happens. And
the moment's done.
Yeah. And naturally, the intended parents go and tend to the much awaited baby. And that's how it should be.
Yep.
But I think I also found that friends and family don't really know how to treat you.
Yeah.
Because you don't have this visible physical presence of a newborn.
Yeah.
Yet you're still processing all of those things, both emotionally and physically.
Yeah.
I know for me, getting back to work was really important. I personally also pumped breast milk for all of my intended parents. Did you happen to pump?
I did.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, personally speaking, that really did help me process a little bit. It gave me something else to focus on. It also, I feel like, helped my body recover a little bit quicker.
Yes.
Is the surrogate allowed to have sex during pregnancy? I get this question all the time, specifically around single people and what dating looks like during pregnancy.
Yeah.
But I know you're a partnered person.
Yes.
Just recently went through IVF. So tell me a little bit about what kind of restrictions you had when it came to sex during pregnancy and what that looked like for you.
So it depends on your clinic's requirements. Every clinic is different. So my last surrogacy journey, we did have a period of abstinence before the transfer. And, while it was difficult because I was engaged at that time, so sexual intercourse was very important to our relationship.
Absolutely.
And so, it was difficult, but it was not unreasonable.
Yeah.
So they're not going to ask you to not have sex for the whole pregnancy or for, months at a time. It's for a season. And so I knew going into it that for, that 5 or 6 weeks, we were not going to be allowed to have sex.
Yep.
That was a discussion that we had. And so there was understanding there. And when you have the supportive partner that you should have during this surrogacy process, they're going to understand that there's going to be things that are asked of you that you need to uphold for medical purposes. And so, we found other ways to connect.
Be creative and do different things. Yeah. I think that, it's a good point. Clinic protocol varies clinic to clinic. I worked with 3 different IVF centers, all of which had different protocols, none of which had a celibacy period that was longer than about 30 days. So we're not talking extended months on months, but I think it is a good transition to remembering that sometimes complications happen and pelvic rest becomes elongated.
Yes.
So, we're not to get too spicy here, but, there's kind of a definition between pelvic rest versus no sex.
Right.
So can you orgasm? Can you place things in the vagina? So you can be creative in some lens and not creative in other lenses. And so I think going back to that physical connection with your husband or partner needs to be something that you talk about early and often, and in the period of even deciding to become a surrogate, whether or not that's something everyone can handle. When it comes to single people, again, sometimes the contract's going to have varying language, But we've got to remember that single people having sex with new people always have to be safe.
Yeah.
And if it becomes a regular sexual relationship, they're going to have to be brought into the clinic and treated as a partner for STI testing, FDA testing. So again, open, honest, transparent communication with your agency is key. No one expects a surrogate to completely put their life on hold for the duration of a surrogacy journey. However, when you enter into this process and sign that legal agreement, we do have a sense of having to make decisions that we might not make for ourselves on behalf of the safety of this process for the intended parents. So, Laura, how did you tell your children about the surrogacy process?
So I sat my kids down and shared with them that as a whole, there are people in this world who cannot physically carry their own babies. And that was something that their mommy, felt really tugged towards. I felt like there was like a pull for me to help those people. I am thankfully good at being pregnant and have been given the gift of being able to carry babies easily and healthy. So I felt like my kids understood that there are people in the world who cannot do that. And then for me to be able to give back. So their understanding has developed because obviously when I was a first-time surrogate, they were really young.
Yeah.
They didn't quite understand it as much as they do now. My kids are 8, 11, and 14. So it is something that they can grasp a lot more right now. And so when mommy's pregnant, my kids are telling their teachers, like, my mommy's having a baby for another family. And so it's something that they've grasped and they accept it and they're supportive and they have, very few questions. It's just kind of normal to them now.
Yeah, it's always been my experience that adults are the ones that make it complicated. I think my children just thought this was really cool and how nice that I'm doing this.
Yeah.
Like you, my surrogacy journey's definitely transcended a long time of my children's childhood since I did it multiple times. And so in the beginning, we always used the cookie analogy, which really worked very well, which was, I said, let's just say we were here and someone rang our bell and they had cookie dough on a cookie sheet and said, my oven's broken. Do you think I could borrow your oven to bake these cookies? And I would say, absolutely, let's bake the cookies. And I'd put them into the oven. And when those cookies came out, they're still their cookies. I'm going to return those cookies back to the people that made the dough and that recipe. And so ultimately speaking, that was a very easy analogy for my kids to grasp. And it felt like such common sense to them. Yeah. I think for me, as they got older, by the time I was kind of retiring from my surrogacy world in that avenue, my children were starting to learn a little bit about sex. And so our discussions around it definitely migrated more to confirm that they understood I didn't have sex with anyone else to become pregnant. I thought that was a really important distinction for them so that they understood the more scientific process as they were able to appropriately digest that information.
Yeah.
And I think that, again, for them, this was just something that mom did and she was good at it and enjoyed it. And I think finally, the other thing I always like to kind of talk about when it came to my children is I started caring for a queer couple. And this was all the way back starting in 2007. And so this was before gay marriage was legal. This was in Charlotte, North Carolina. And this was some of the first exposure to my neighbors that they had ever even been around queer people. When we went to the hospital, one of our nurses said that was the first time she'd ever been part of a birthing experience with a gay couple. And she said, it was really interesting to me because I thought I would be really uncomfortable and this would be really yucky. And she said it was actually one of the most beautiful things I've ever experienced. And I never forgot that. I feel like our presence in that community was so beneficial to having people kind of think outside themselves. And that's the exact kind of message I want to give my children, is
Absolutely.
to be accepting and kind. And when you're called to do something that is helpful, you almost have an obligation to do it. And, I know it's an odd skill, but it's a skill I had. So having babies happened to be that thing that I really wanted to have happen. So for us, I feel like the children are probably the least complex thing about the process.
Yeah, I agree.
Comment any question below and we'll answer it.